I'm Nathan Ponchard.
I'm John Law,
This is Chasing Cars.
and this is the 2022 Affordable Drivers Car Challenge, where we're pitting the Hyundai i20N against the Subaru BRZ Coupe S.
It's rare that two drivers' cars as long awaited as the new Gen BRZ and the i20N are released that close to each other. So while this is a drivers' car challenge, it's also a celebration of the fact that what we have here is great. Now, you might be questioning why we're doing a 2+2 coupe against a 5-seat light hatchback, but people don't think along rational lines when they're buying cars. Considering that the price differential between these two cars, as seen here, is barely 7,000 Australian dollars. So that means that these two totally make sense. Now, the car over here is the i20N, currently being run by John Law as a long-termer.
Yes, indeed. And it's a pretty simple recipe. 150 kilowatt turbocharged engine, front wheel drive with an LSD, lowered suspension, performance dampers, and a torsion beam rear end. And that's been around for ages, but this is the first time Hyundai has done it in a package this size. And spoiler alert, it's heaps of fun. And of course, if you want to check out any more of my content, long-term content, then you should be able to click below this video to see that. But let's find out about Ponch's BRZ.
Now, you've probably been living under a rock to not know that the new BRZ is here, but also to not know that it is fairly closely based on the car it replaces, which is now 10 years old, but that is not a bad thing, as we shall discover when we drive it. So what we have here, the platform, the block of the engine, the hard points of the body, the suspension, the transmissions, they're all the same as the car before, but developments of that car. What makes the new Gen BRZ great, though, is the finessed detail engineering that has gone into making every aspect of this purest, non-turbocharged, rear-wheel drive coupe even better than it's ever been.
So while these two cars are very different recipes, they're both designed to be able to be taken to the racetrack and driven around all day and come home and not be totally falling to pieces. But not everyone lives on a racetrack. Well, certainly most people don't. So we've come out here west of the Great Divide to test these two cars on some real testing roads out here in Western New South Wales to see which one is more fun and which one is going to suit your day-to-day life better.
The one thing that the BRZ and the i20N share is that they're both simple cars inside. This is not about creating a Bentley-like interior. It is just about having simple, affordable ways of doing seating and dashboards. The BRZ, you do sit really low in it, but you probably don't notice that until you really sit in the other car. But there is definitely a bum close to the ground, low center of gravity, low cowl, terrific view in this vehicle. The driving position is really good. I don't know whether the seats are quite as good lumbar-wise as the previous one, but the seat support and all the adjustment is generally there. It's not quite perfect, but then it's not electric. It's all basic levers and manual stuff. Where I think the BRZ doesn't match the i20N is just the general sort of arrangement of everything. Like, it has the utility, like you can fit big bottles in the doors and all that sort of stuff, you know, great aircon, easy to use. But I think that the quality of the Hyundai, in my opinion, is probably better than here. The trim's nice on the seats, but not all the plastics are really that Porsche 911 like. This is a 40 grand sports coupe, not 400.
So yeah, compared to the BRZ, you sit pretty high up in this i20N, but compared to pretty much every other car we've tested recently at Chasing Cars, you definitely sit low. And it's not like the seat isn't set low in the car, because it's a long way down from the dashboard and it is lovely and figure hugging. I actually prefer these seats a little bit to the BRZs, and their headrest interfaces better with a helmet, because the BRZ sort of juts into the back of your head, whereas this gives you plenty of space. So it's even better for track day stuff. And as I said before, they give you plenty of support, even though they may only be just manually adjustable seats. So you can get a really comfortable driving position. This steering wheel too is really nice to hold, fat, but without being BMW fat. And it just feels right in this interior. Now, I am going to say that, of course, because I've come pretty used to this long-term i20N that I've been driving. I've done, nearly coming up to 2,000 Ks in this thing so far. So yeah, I've gotten pretty accustomed to it. But yeah, the technology just blows the BRZ away. It doesn't have soft touch materials where that coupe does, but the i20N's technology package is just simple to use. Wired CarPlay that just works straight away. You've got your N mode, drive mode customizations in here, lap timers, all that sort of stuff. All the figure headline grabbing things, 10.25-inch digital driver's display, navigation installed as standard. It just feels really well polished and still really well set up for driving. Just like the BRZ, not quite as low, but it's all there when you need it. Not to mention the super quick access to the N modes with these paddles on the steering wheel and rev matching if you want to do that. Though the pedals are set up so well for heel and toe, I haven't felt the need to. And then to add a clincher to that is the fact that you do have back seats in this car, and they're not just token back seats. Like, to be honest, most of the small SUVs we test here at Chasing Cars, these things are real. You can properly fit a family in this car. It has great utility, even down to the door bins, which Hyundais are usually not great for. I've got my 1.5 litre Nalgene bottle in there, which is keeping us cool on this hot day. And yeah, you can tell it's based on a European family car. And while it does have drawbacks in terms of outright sportiness and that sort of thing, it really kicks ass when it comes to just working every day. So a quick diversion away from the fun stuff to talk about the realities of owning these two performance cars, which is actually not as expensive as you might think. Now, to service the Hyundai i20N, it's going to cost you $1,545 for 12 months or 50,000 Ks. The intervals are 12 months and 10,000 Ks, and the warranty runs for 5 years and unlimited kilometres and includes track use. The ADR combined consumption figure is 6.9 litres per 100 Ks. Now, as for the BRZ, the prices are up pretty much across the board, but the service interval is a little bit longer at 12 months or 15,000 Ks. So 5 years or 75,000 Ks of motoring is going to set you back $2,390 for this manual example. ADR combined fuel consumption is 9.2 litres per 100, so quite a lot thirstier than that turbocharged i20N, and the warranty is 5 years and unlimited kilometres, but it doesn't cover you in the same way on track that the Hyundai's warranty does.
The thing about having a low-slung coupe in modern times is that usually by the time you can afford one, Porsche 911, you can no longer comfortably get it in and out of it. Whereas the BRZ at only $40,190 for this Coupe S 6-speed manual means that you can afford it much earlier in your life and you will no longer have problems like that. And I suppose it's the accessibility of a car like this, as well as like the i20N, that makes something like this great, because everyone can vaguely afford it. Now, where I think the BRZ really comes into its own is that the finessing of this generation of car has made a huge difference to the way that all the disparate elements of what makes a car corner and drive and handle and whatever come together beautifully. The changes are everywhere, from the suspension, which is the same, but it's been finessed so well with a stronger body, much stronger body in fact, that it can be softer than before. The transition between understeer and oversteer, or just the way the car drives through a corner, like we're doing now, is just so much more progressive than it used to be. And yet there's also a suppleness to the BRZ. This car rides much better than the i20N. Much, much better. Although it also has much more tyre noise. So, depends on how loud you have the stereo. But there is just a smoothness and a polish to this that it didn't really have before. Compared to the i20N in the engine department, what the BRZ has is immediacy, and that is throttle response. Like the 2.4 in this car, now with 174 kilowatts at 7,000 RPM and 250 Newton meters at 3,700, gives a pretty broad span between where the torque comes in and where the power comes in. And it just grows exponentially in the amount of power that it delivers, kind of like a Porsche, although sounding like a BRZ with fake acoustics, which is not entirely ideal, but it is not hateful. The 6-speed manual in the BRZ is also carried over, and it rewards decisiveness. That means quick in on the clutch, nice snickety changes as a result, and that blends perfectly with the incisiveness of its throttle response. And then there's also its steering. And much like before, it has really great connection with the road, especially for an electric setup. And I think it's that natural sort of sweet almost suave nature to the way that this car blends together all those aspects. Like, you can be driving along and do this in the steering and the car instantly moves, yet it never feels nervous. It just is very natural. And there's a gait about the way this car corners that is just like almost petite. Like, you can drive it on your fingers and just feel the balance of the back end and just enjoy that really quite exquisite way that this car corners and rides and strings everything together that just isn't quite there in the i20N. I know that the Hyundai is a lot of fun to drive, but it doesn't have that blend that the Subaru has. It doesn't feel as holistic to me, and while it's a laugh, this is just a joy.
So, if you thought the Subaru BRZ Coupe S was affordable, then you're going to love the price of this i20N. Sitting here with the black roof, it's $33,490 plus on-road costs, which is about $7,000 less than that coupe. And the advantage of this car is that it has this amazing duality of character. You've got so many drive modes and so much customization, which the BRZ simply doesn't have. And that means it sort of fits around your life a little better. It's kind of like that mate of yours that you've had for ages, and you know that any time you send them a message, they're going to be totally up for coming for a beer with you down the pub. And it's just that dependable, fun nature of this car that I really love. Now, that's made up of a lot of things. Now, I will say that the i20N's overall finished package does feel like it could do with a little bit more finessing. Yes, the engine's really good when it's in its nice mid-range grunt, and it does rev out nicely to the red line, but there's some areas where it doesn't feel quite as tractable as the BRZ's naturally aspirated 2.4 litre engine, which is a bit of a surprise given the last gen BRZ never really had that tractability that this car does. So the i20N does have that really nice mid-range shove, and the 0 to 100 km/h claims for both of these cars are so close. This car is 6.2 seconds, though you do have to be ragging it pretty hard to get that going. Now, I've also mentioned that rev hang, that slight issue that makes this drivetrain feel a little bit underdone compared to other hot hatches out there, but actually, as I've been driving it more and more, that really does seem to fade into the distance. But the thing about the i20N is that, in theory, I can criticize it, but you know what? You pop it in N mode, you're on a great bit of road like we are out here west of Sydney over the Great Dividing Range, and the chassis is just fun. It's just with you all the time. It's got such a good front end, and you can really lean on that Torsen mechanical limited slip differential to pull you around a corner with such conviction, and it's such a cool feeling, so different to that BRZ. They are very different cars after all. On that as well, the steering isn't quite as nice as the BRZ. In fact, it's just a fair way off. It's quite electric, and it doesn't give you that crisp, uninterrupted feel of the BRZ, but you can just lean on it, and that's the great thing about this car. You can get that rear end working under brakes to really pivot it into the corners, and it's just fun. Just encourages you to have fun. It has that real, you know, great personality that you want from a hot hatch like this. The only real criticism I can level at it on country roads like this is the ride. Most of the time it's really good, but it feels like there's not enough ramp up in the bump stops or in the spring rates or in the damping or something. So it feels like it bottoms out quite regularly over some nasty bumps that are out here that litter these roads, and also around the inner west where I live just inside Sydney. It does pick up some harsh bumps where the BRZ is just crystal smooth and beautiful and so lovely to drive with that nice supple suspension setup. But as I said before, pop it in N mode, change down a couple of gears, and there's a smile back on my face. And that's what this i20N is all about.
So I suppose the interesting thing about being in the i20N is that I've actually driven this car before, as we know. You can check out my review of it on our site, but I didn't really feel the way I did after getting in it from the BRZ. And I think the thing that I took away from that the most is that it felt a little bit like an SUV. Like, it's a light hatchback. It feels not like an SUV when it's the only thing you've driven, but then when you get out of the BRZ, which is this slinky, low-slung, proper purist coupe, into Mum's hatchback with all of this chili put on top, I was like, oh wow, this is supersized. I felt really high off the road. I had an amazing view. The windscreen pillars are way in front of me. And I suppose also there's that aspect of, it's not a naturally aspirated car. It has turbo lag, quite a lot more lag than I remember it having. Definitely needs, I think, to have all of those switches amped to max engine response because there's a lot to be had here. And when it's on song, it's a great car to drive.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that. But it's really interesting jumping straight into the BRZ after driving that out to the meet point, the i20N, because it's the total opposite, obviously. You feel like you're sat so low in this car. You have this totally different view out, but it's still amazing. The seat's set really low, though it's not that comfortable for me. I didn't find it super comfortable. But I think what really makes the difference in the BRZ is that fingertip light steering. It just feels so reactive and just relaxed to your inputs, where the i20N can feel a little bit hyperactive. And then, there's such amazing driver feedback from the gearbox. It just feels like a wholly more sporting package that's, from the ground up designed to be a sports car, which is exactly what it is. So
yeah. Well, that said, though, like the i20N's gearbox, I thought after being in the BRZ, which needs a very specific amount of clutch depression at exactly the right time to get that little snickety gear change happening, whereas in the i20N, it felt like it was sort of weighted to go into the next gear, and it had all this extra lubrication and oiling and just a bit of momentum about it. Easier to drive, definitely more satisfying and easier to hit home. I think it's just an easier performance car to live with. You don't need to sort of put in those delicate inputs that the BRZ completely rewards. And the i20N, you can be a little bit ham-fisted and a little bit rough. And for much of the time, it rewards your roughness, don't you reckon?
Precisely, absolutely. But I must say, though, when we're out here on these roads in second, third, fourth gear, the BRZ's gearbox does really make sense. As Teflon smooth as that is, the extra notchiness kind of adds something back to the driving experience. It makes it feel, a little bit more of a sense of an occasion than the i20N, maybe?
Yeah, it's challenge and reward, right? It's the more decisive and the more you ask of it, and just the more you hammer that clutch and gear change home, it suddenly just goes click, 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 and it's all there.
Yep, and there's no rev hang in this car, of course. It's snick, smooth, quick.
Old school.
Yep. If you like either of these two cars, then Chasing Cars can help you take the next step. If you want to organise a test drive or download a brochure for either of these cars, then click the handy link in the video description below.
The thing about the Subaru BRZ and the i20N is that they're actually both really good cars. In fact, borderline great cars. And we would easily own both of them. But I very much have in mind which one I would rather take home. And Johnny, I suspect you feel the same way.
I do. As much as I love driving that BRZ, its crisp responses, the i20N's extra practicality, the fact that you've got back seats that you can fold down to take stuff like bicycles and flat pack furniture, just means that it would fit into my life like a dream. No extra compromises, and it still gives me that hit of adrenaline every time I drive it. So that's kind of why I'm running it as a long-termer. But I think Ponch has a slightly different idea.
Well, look, I agree with you about the i20N. Like, it is amazingly good at being a 5-seat little hatchback. It does all those day-to-day stuff that you want a hatch to do, but it also has this awesome layer on top, although I do think that it needs to be finessed and its midlife update to really achieve true greatness.
Yep.
Whereas the BRZ, I think, is just more of a holistic car. It's like, if you had to think of some lame food analogy, it would be like making your own pasta sauce. This one, you've spent hours chopping up the ingredients themselves, cooking them down, letting it simmer, turning it into something that's really, really delicious. Whereas the i20N is a bit more like buying a really good packet sauce from the shop, passing it off as your own to your friends, chucking in a bit of olives and some extra chili and still enjoying it, but it just doesn't have that depth and that kind of exquisite all-round excellence that the Subaru has. And I think that's why I would take the BRZ until the day I was so old I couldn't get out of it properly.
So that's it. We've got two cars, we've got two presenters, both taking different ones, and I think that works out well. Except for the fact that, currently speaking, you can't really get either of these cars brand new from a dealership. It's about a 6-month wait for the i20N, and as far as I know for the BRZ, the 500 allocation is already sold out, so you're going to have to be waiting a little bit longer. There are other performance cars out there, of course, as well, so if there's other ones that you think would be better than these two, let us know in the comments section down below, under 50 grand. And while you're down there leaving a comment, we'd love it if you could hit that subscribe button and the bell icon if you haven't done so already. And as always, thank you for watching
Chasing Cars.